Hi, I'm Jen Wilson, Senior Programmer, and welcome to this Film Independent Presents Festival Visions Edition Q&A. Special thanks to our lead sponsor, HFPA, our media sponsor, KCRW, our virtual screenings partner, Vision Media, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Today, we're spotlighting a short film called House of Tulip by Cydney Tucker that played in the 2022 New Orleans Film Festival. And with us to do the Q&A is festival programmer Zuri Obi. Welcome, Zuri.
Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. Very happy to be here talking to Sid about this very special, beautiful film. So thank you for inviting me. So yeah, I guess we can get into it. I'm Zuri Obi. I'm the film and conference programmer here at New Orleans Film Society. My pronouns are she, they. And Sid, please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and where you're from.
Hey everybody, this is Sid. I am originally from New York and I'm tuning in from the beach in New York, so forgive my outfit in advance. The surf was calling. And I'm a journalist and documentary filmmaker, pronouns she, her, and happy to be here.
Awesome. So I mean, let's get into it. Tell us about just like how you heard about House of Tulip and your journey towards making this film.
Okay, at one point in time, it used to take me forever to do this.
I need to clean out my makeup drawing. I can remember, being young and struggling with my sexual orientation, gender identity, and not even understanding like what it was that I was going through. I like to think about city as the melting pot or the gumbo pot, right? And just like gumbo, it takes many different ingredients to make this wonderful, delicious brew. And all of us add that ingredient into this gumbo. What is your experience as a trans woman in New Orleans?
Basically, as a journalist, I was working at Al Jazeera at the time, and one of my colleagues did this really amazing piece about this Black trans woman who was killed in Dallas, Malaysia Booker. And, from there, like our team basically, like we're analyzing and trying to see like what was going on with these rising rates of homicides with Black trans women. But there was just a lack of coverage, like a blatant lack of coverage in terms of like the levels in which this was happening. Like, trans individuals and specifically Black trans women are being killed at like epidemic proportions, not just nationally, but internationally. And as journalists, like I wasn't seeing that like on any level. And so for me, I was like, well, why aren't we hearing about this? And two, like what's going on with these communities? Like what is being done, right? So I started looking into it, and from a journalistic perspective, I always start with research, obviously, and I dive into kind of where this is happening. I was reading, I was looking at the numbers and checking all the stats. And basically, like Louisiana had some of the highest homicide rates, in comparison to the rest of the states across the country. And so I was like, okay, like, but what's done on the ground there? So then I started going down the rabbit hole of research, and that's how I found House of Tulip. It's an incredible nonprofit organization run by Mariah Moore and Milan Shuri Nicole. Just creating safe space for trans and non-binary individuals. At the time, Mariah was like in the very initial stages of creating House of Tulip. It wasn't what it is today, which is incredible. It was still incredible, but it started out as a fund. It started as a fund because they were like, okay, a lot of these people work in the service industry. Let's start a fund so that we can distribute funds and get people like where they need to be. But in doing so, they realized, and I'm obviously paraphrasing this, Mariah will say this in their own words, but they found that housing was like the core issue, right? And that they needed to provide housing for people in the community because of just discriminating across the like shelter system and also lack of resources. And so they were like, let's create our own. And so they created them. I was lucky enough to have found them at that time when they were just launching. And, I always believe in like transparency from the get. So like if I'm interested in doing a project or doing a film and like I don't know the community or I'm not from there, I do my research first. And then I also like I make sure that I let them know that I've done my research, but I also approach it very humbly because at the end of the day, like even though it's like a Black queer woman, I'm not a Black trans woman. So it's like I wanted this project from the get to be hyper collaborative. I wanted to make sure that most everyone else like and also from the region. I didn't want to like helicopter in and just be like, I know everything about New Orleans and this community. I let them know essentially like, like where I was in space and time. Like when I was applying for funding, to make the film, I let them know I am just applying for funding right now. I let them know as soon as I got funding, I let them know next steps in terms of like what would happen. And so I stayed in touch with them, and like I would talk to them a week. And so one week I spoke to Mariah, and she actually told me, she was like, oh, like, I was like, what are you doing this weekend? And she was just like very nonchalantly like, oh, I have a photo shoot. And I was like, ooh, that sounds fun. Okay. And she's like, yeah, I'm launching my campaign. I was like, girl, what? Say less. And I was like, how did you bury the lead? But that's just the kind of person she is. She's just so humble, and like this work that she does is just so intrinsic to who she is. And it just was like, I gotta do this. I gotta do this thing to help my community. And so I was like, I gotta move to New Orleans to make this film.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, actually, you're touching on something that I kind of wanted to unpack a little bit. You don't identify as a trans filmmaker. And although, trans filmmakers are gaining more and more access to the industry and commanding the resources they need to like kind of like snatch back control of their stories, but it still remains that there aren't as many like trans storytellers as in the industry as there are trans stories to tell, right? So invariably, we're going to have folks telling trans stories that aren't necessarily trans, but that do have the intention of, having this story be widely available or have, help amplify voices. So what are some, I guess, tips or just advice to folks who don't identify as trans, but that still feel that they would like to use their resources, their time, and just their storytelling know-how to amplify trans voices? Like, what are some advice? I know that for you, one of the things that you mentioned was before you even started the film, before you even applied for grant, you spoke to the women whose stories you're about to tell. And a lot of filmmakers sometimes want to get the grant first, right? And they want to get the funds together so that they can present like basically a very just unified together front when they start filming. But you chose to do the opposite. And I think that's really unique. But what other like just like I guess approaches or styles or tips that you have for folks who again want to use their resources to help amplify trans voices but are not trans themselves?
Yeah, honestly, it's a constant like humbling process, right? Like you just need to like take a step back. And so even from the onset, like I wasn't hell bent on like I knew I wanted to amplify the story, but I wasn't like hell bent on being the one that had to like helmet, right? Like so I reached out to a bunch of trans directors and trying to see if they would be interested in directing, and then I was going to produce. But they were also talented, that they were all really busy, and Sundance hadn't launched that. They have this amazing like trans filmmakers program now, but that didn't exist. So I was also having time like finding people, which is just the blatant thing about visibility with underrepresented communities in our industry in general. And so I was looking, and then when I couldn't find anyone, that's when I was like, I mean, either way, I was going to make it hyper collaborative, but that, there was even more so this balancing of power where I really just kind of let Mariah, Milan kind of lead and guide the process. It would never be like, I need to film today. Like, da, 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 da. It'd be like, okay, like, what's your schedule like? What are you doing today? Like, are you comfortable with this? And then some days, to be frank, like they do a lot of work. They've been through a lot. Like, they'd be like, yeah, no, today's not a good day. And like, that would be fine with me. And then Mariah and Milan are also the type of people where like, you don't get to like retake something. So either you get it that first time or you don't get it, especially with Mariah. And so it was really important to be there, like physically be there. And for me, the most important part was to be there, like even without a camera. So like I purposely, like I coincidentally, I mean, New Orleans is small, especially in comparison to New York, but like I lived like literally like walking distance, if not like a bike ride, a car ride away from the house, like the org's offices. And so like they're like without a camera, just hanging out with them. And also it was important for people in the community that were part of House of Tulip that like benefited from like the community and the services, that they saw my face and they saw that I wasn't just there to be like with the camera, but I was like also participating in these workshops with them, and also creating posters for Trans Day of Remembrance with them, and like really trying to get them to know them as individuals, and gauging also their comfortability around being around a camera, and also if they wanted to be involved, and just doing all of that. So that was like equally important to me. So it's just kind of like finding all these steps along the way where you can really just like humble yourself, check in, and make a really like transparent and collaborative filmmaking process. And it's a learning curve, right? Like, that doesn't mean that I didn't hit any bumps or, or things like that, because like sometimes I kind of overly corrected, and then Mariah would be like, oh, you didn't have to do that. Like, you can just like ask me whatever. And so like, but that's great because you're developing a relationship just like any other friendship or any other kind of relationship with another individual. So that just makes you a better filmmaker, and also makes you, makes your participants feel more comfortable around you and like they could be their authentic selves, which at the end of the day makes for a better film. So.
So it seems like for you, you just showed up with vulnerability and openness, and really not so rigid on a schedule, because the story reveals itself. You don't take the story, right? You don't build the story necessarily. The story reveals itself, and that requires a lot of patience and intimacy and just vulnerability. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So your film really, well, let me take a step back. When we are talking about just the issues that are happening in the queer community and the trans community, the violence that's escalating, it's hard to have a film that's hopeful sometimes, and that feels good, and that feels that it has a joyous like overtone, and a lot of our lives have that. We have low points, we have points that are very scary and terrifying, but we also have moments that are joyous and mundane. And you chose to have these moments throughout your film, and to have like a focus on joy, a focus on celebration, a focus on moving forward. Mariah is running for, city council. We're building these houses. We're building these spaces for trans folks to not only have safe housing, but to change their names, to know their rights, and all of this just harkens to joy. Why was that important for you in this film to focus on that? And also, I noticed that you did not include any violence at all, like no depiction, anything at all. It was mostly spoken about through my Mariah, who had lost a sister. But, we experienced that through the story that she was telling, and not necessarily visually. So you made a conscious decision to not include traumatic footage and to not re-traumatize folks who are watching this, right? Why was that so important for you to focus on joy and making this film and editing this film, especially now with what's going on?
That's such a good question. Honestly, I think it comes down to representation, right? And Mariah has a really great kind of thing she says in the film itself, which is like, and forgive me for paraphrasing, but essentially it's talking about like how, trans and non-binary folks exist out of spaces of trauma, exist out of spaces of violence. And to me, like, the most magical part about this whole community is the love, is the community, is like the sense of authenticity and unapologetic, like, just like living, right? And like so many people don't see that. Like, when they hear about these communities, it's like stereotypes, or it's like just the doom and gloom of it all. And for me, it was really important to showcase like, no, like, this is a community, like, these individuals have family. Oftentimes they have family that, doesn't support them. But sometimes, like in Milan's case, like, she has a mom who supports her, and supports not only just her, but her sisters and people in her community. And like, we never see that representation. And so like, I was like, this is important, and also to see them in roles of position of power, right? Like, we have representatives in Congress that are trans. Like, we have local representatives like Mariah that are trans, that are Black trans women. Like, it's really important for people to see these things, especially for people who don't know anyone that's trans or non-binary, right? So they can educate themselves and realize that like, people exist within their spaces, even like, people are running locally and they might not even know, or like the things that they're going through. But it's important to show that, they exist outside of these paradigms. And for me, I was like, there's already so much violence out there. I want to show like the answer to that. Like, what is this community doing to step up where like the government policy and all these other things are like leaving them behind? And also, I think it's what's really inspirational is that like, House of Tulip, like, everyone in New Orleans, like a lot of people in Louisiana, I've even met people in New York that I mentioned House of Tulip, and they know exactly who they are and what they do because they do the work, right? Like, they're really out here helping people, and they're not about anything else. And what's really upsetting, but also like sincere is that like both Mariah and Milan always say that like, you know, at the end of the day, their goal is to not even have to have a House of Tulip, because like there shouldn't have to be one, right? There should, like, they want to work so hard that they put themselves out of jobs, right?
Yep.
And so it was important to me to show like the 360 view of like their impact, and their impact and their reach like surpasses like New Orleans, surpasses Louisiana. It's a ripple effect. And now we're starting to see other organizations that are very like akin to House of Tulip popping up across the country. And like that's what we need in the state of where things are right now. It's like a state of emergency, like on an international scope. So like any little bit can help. And like it's important for people to realize like the individuals that are on the ground doing that work.
Yeah, and that's what I really love about this film, and I think that that's what, you know, that gives it just a special feeling, right? When we're being confronted with these stats and facts, but also we're presented the answer, where community isn't waiting for government, isn't waiting for these institutions to help out. They're like, I need to help out my sisters, I need to help out my neighbors. And also, I think another thing that was really beautiful and special to me was to see this relationship between a trans woman and their mother, right? And her mother, that was really beautiful, that to see Milan's relationship, Milan Cherie, love Milan. And yeah, just to see that reflection and representation and that support, especially within the Black community. You know, I don't think that violence or violence against trans folks is necessarily overrepresented in the Black community. I think it's very much even. But, you know, a lot of the times when it's being represented or in the media, we see Black people. And to see that love and that joy as an answer is really just moving the needle and moving the conversation and nuancing our stories about the trans origins and our family dynamics, you know, really beautiful. So yeah, just to, I guess, wrap out, you know, I know that you got to go surfing. What are you working on now? Like, what do you, and how can folks follow more of your work? One, and two, how can folks continue to support House of Tulip? Where are y'all now in terms of the funding or pushing the story? I know I asked you two questions at once, but where are you and where is House of Tulip? How can we follow your work, and how can we support House of Tulip?
So House of Tulip is doing fantastic per usual. They just opened up a new facility, which is really exciting, and it has more beds that are accessible and like 24-hour services. They're building out the team, which is really amazing. And then, you know, and Mariah is running again in 2025.
Yes.
She literally, I mean, listen, she raised the most money out of all the candidates. She came fourth out of 14 candidates. She's gonna win, okay? Like, everyone, we're ready. Like, they weren't ready before, but now we're ready, okay? Like, they are ready.
Yes.
And I guess, like, in terms of like me personally, I have a couple of projects going on right now that I'm seeking funding for. One is about lithium mining in the Congo. And basically the extractive practices and like, you know, modern day colonialism that is happening, and the impact that it's happening, you know, that's happening in a small like artisanal mining region in the southern region of the Congo called Kolwezi. And that one, you know, same thing. I think honestly the through line in my work is like, this situation is happening and it might be oppressive or it might be impacting these people on like a detrimental level, but like, this is the power and the autonomy that this group has, and this is how they're fighting back. So that's really kind of what that project is about. And kind of comparing and contrasting the US mindset of like, you know, the green evolution and being like, I'm doing so good with my electric car, but like at what cost to these people and their land and, you know, their families like over there. So it's a story about autonomy and you know, just like small time workers and families, and I'm really excited about it. Yeah, that's kind of it. And then you can follow me on Instagram, Cyd Lane, CYDLAINE. But yeah, I'm always down to collaborate. Hit me up. Always lurking on pieces, journalistically aligned, but doing the work, you know, hyper character driven. So yes.
Yeah, definitely doing the work. And I know if you would like to support House of Tulip, it's www.houseoftulipno for New Orleans.com. So that's houseoftulipno.com. And I think you can also follow them on Instagram under the same handle. It's either House of Tulip or House of Tulip NO. Yeah. So thank you so much, Sid, for just taking time out of your busy, amazing, adventurous day to talk about your film. And thank you for the work that you've done, and just the way that you approach your work. I think that that's for folks to just, I guess, not follow, but to learn from that. So especially now when we're trying to tell more stories that are, LGBTQI and specifically trans, just using your work and how you approach your work as a model for someone who's not identified as trans. I really appreciate that. So thank you again for showing up and doing the work. We miss you here in New Orleans, and hopefully we see you back here soon.
I am counting down the days until I'm back in New Orleans.
It's hot now,
Also,
so you
if
don't want to be
anybody
here now.
wants to screen House of Tulip, hit me up because we are doing a robust impact campaign and we want to get as many eyeballs on it so people know about the organization and the work that they're doing. So if you're interested, hit me up.
Yep, and then we got your Instagram handle, so hopefully folks find in your DM and we continue this story as evergreen, right? Because we should be watching this every year, the whole year, whether or not it's June. We're gay 365, not just June, y'all.
Thank you. We do not exist just with 1 month. Thank you. Thank you. Also, these rates of homicides are going up every year. It surpasses the previous. So please donate to your local trans, non-binary organizations and, support a trans individual. If you see GoFundMe, if you see, Venmo, do it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for that. And with that, that'll conclude our Q&A and signing off here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Zuri.
Thank you.